Have you ever watched an old movie in which the heroes are on the run? Or maybe they're chasing after somebody. It doesn't really matter. But they have a muscle car that can fly. And they've got the pedal down. And they are moving down the road. And they drive and drive and drive. And then they turn off on a little side road. And then they come to just what's a little gravel path. And they whip it hard and throw gravel as they turn on up the path that turns out to be a long driveway, and then they skid to a stop right in front of an old house. House that hadn't been lived in years, and they jump out and they make their way up to the rickety porch and make their way easy across, and they open the door slowly and look around. Then they start making their way through the cobwebs, going from one room into the next. And then, about the time you relax, they hear the board creak. They hear the footsteps. One of them says to the other, listen. Then you hear the door swing on its hinges. There's somebody here. We're not alone. That's the way it is with life. Sometimes we get the illusion that this is just all of us. But other times, nature particularly has a way of breaking through to let us know there's more out there than what meets the eye. That our senses, as good as they are, don't pick up everything. And as smart as we think we are, we don't know everything. Matter of fact, we probably know very, very little of reality. Nature, like we said, has a way of telling us that. Some night you sit down and you're looking at the stars on one of those nights when you feel like you just reach up and grab one, and you get the sense that there's just so much more here than we could ever fathom. Begin to feel kind of foolish to think we've been to the moon and we think we know the whole universe. Maybe we've overplayed our knowledge a little bit. Waves pounding on the beach. The complexities of our bodies. They're amazingly complex. We're walking through a trail on a spring day. And you get the sense there's just more here than meets the eye. The psalmist said that the heavens declare the glory of God, and there is no language that doesn't hear it. In our most foolish moments, we get to thinking we've got it all figured out. It's all us and we're good. But in our more realistic moments, we know there's more out there. And we want to connect with it. And particularly if there's a God, we want to connect with Him. We want that. And sometimes we desperately need it. Sometimes life gets really hard, and the world around us seems chaotic and out of control and terrifying and without hope. And we get to the end of our road and the end of our rope, and it seems like there is nothing that could possibly save us from the fate that we are going to experience. And in those moments, we want to sense, we need something. We look for those things that are transcendent, that aren't wrapped up in the movements of time, something that we can count on to be there. Apocalyptic writing was very popular with the Jews, particularly in times in which they were in trouble, particularly in times in which they felt their existence threatened. One of them, is because apocalyptic writing is about pulling the veil back so that we can see what's really going on, that there's more than meets the eye. We can see a bigger picture of what's happening. We can understand that God is not sitting on His hands somewhere and just watching this, but He is close at hand, He is active, He's in His place in the world. The congregations in Asia Minor, when John writes the book of Revelation, are about to go through one of those hard times. One of those times in which they worry that whether they will survive it or not. And so, here, before the turmoil and the trial even begins, God gives John this vision in which he's going to pull back the veil to let them see the whole picture of what's getting ready to happen. Not just the part that they're going to sense with their eyes and ears and that they're going to experience day in and day out, but the whole picture, the whole of reality. And that's what this vision is about as we begin chapter 4. After this I looked, and there before me was a door standing open in heaven, and a voice I had first heard speaking to me like a trumpet said, "Come up here, I will show you what must take place after this." At once I was in the Spirit, and there before me was a throne in heaven with someone sitting on it. We are in the throne room of heaven. Now, think about what we're studying now. This is Revelation. This is apocalyptic literature. Does that literally mean that there is somewhere in the heavens a throne room? And that if you could open the door and walk in, you would be in a throne room of heaven? No, that's not what it means. It's an image. Now, heaven might have a throne room. Maybe someday we'll find that out, that there is a throne room of the world, possibly. But that's not the idea here. The throne is an image, a representation. It's meant to convey something to us. So what does a throne room represent? Well, a throne room is about rule and power and authority. It's where the king resides. And so by showing John the throne room of heaven, he is showing John the rule of the world. This is how the world, and from which the world is ruled. You are in the place of authority, John. I'm going to show you heaven's authority. This is the throne room of heaven. And who sits on the throne? Who sits on the throne of the world? If you'd asked the people of Asia Minor, you'd went through their towns and taken a survey, who rules? They would have told you the Caesars rule. And the throne that ruled Asia Minor was over in Rome. The Romans we have language where they write back in the day. They even talked like they ruled it all. As they talked back and forth amongst themselves, they felt the whole world was under their rule. They thought that they occupied the throne room of heaven. But the one on the throne is not Roman. But he has this particular appearance. It says he has the appearance of jasper and ruby. Now what's that about? Once again, remember, these are symbols, these are images meant to convey something. And the key here is jasper and ruby are white and red. Their colors are the big thing. In Jewish writings, white is the symbol of holiness. And righteousness is depicted in red. And so the person who sits on the throne is holy and he is righteous. And at his feet, it goes on to say, there's an emerald rainbow, a green rainbow. Now what's that all about? What do rainbows represent? Well, that's not hard. What's the most famous rainbow in Scripture? Noah. Yeah, that's that important rainbow and a prominent rainbow and very popular. What's the rainbow about? It's about God's promise to Noah, his covenant that he wouldn't destroy the world again by flood. It's about God's faithfulness. And so here's this rainbow that represents covenants and promises and faithfulness, but it's a green rainbow. We live in Mississippi and the grass grows here 9 months out of the year just about. But if you lived in a desert, you would know that grass doesn't do that everywhere. And it takes a lot of water to make things live. And one of the ways you can tell when something's live is by its color. If it's brown and gray and dry, you know it's burning up. But it's green. When it's green, it's alive. It's not dead. Nothing's killed it. And so you have this king who sits on this throne. He is righteous. He is holy. His promises live. That's the point of these images. See, this is apocalyptic literature. These are images meant to convey ideas. Here's this king, this righteous holy king whose promises live, and around him are 24 elders sitting on their thrones. Now what's that all about? Well, the Jews loved numerology, where numbers not just have mathematical value, a quantity value, but they also have ideas associated with them. One is the loneliest number, about unity and harmony. One. Now, see, we use some numerology still. Well, 12 is a number that is a particular favorite of the Jews, and it doesn't take long to figure out what 12 represents. There are 12 tribes of Israel. There are 12 apostles. 12 is a number that to Jewish people represented God's people. And so there are two groups of 12 here, these 24 elders, two groups of 12. And we're talking to Christians, so it makes pretty quick summation. You have the kingdoms of old and the kingdoms of the new covenant. These are God's people, old and new. These 24 elders wear crowns. Now these are not the crowns of kings, and sometimes that may throw us a little bit. The idea is not that they rule with power, even though they're sitting on their thrones, it says. The idea with the crown is that they are victors. They have overcome. This crown is the Stephanos, the ring that you think of when you see the Olympics, old Olympic crowns that the victor received. That's this crown. It's the Stephanos, the victor's crown. So these are people that have overcome. They have won. They have overcome their trials as they stand around the throne. And so the image is of the king who's holy and righteous with the living promises. His promises are alive, and around him are all his subjects who are victorious and who have overcome. And from the king's throne comes lightning and thunder. His rule has power and authority. And in front of the throne are 7 lamps. Now that one would throw us. Thank goodness the text tells us what the 7 lamps are. The 7 lamps are the Spirit of God. This is the Holy Spirit. Probably the idea that it's all-knowing. There's no dark places. The Spirit of God knows everything. And the Spirit of God is, however, the Spirit of God are these 7 lamps. And then before all of this is the sea of glass. Much of this scene plays out from images from the tabernacle and from the temple. And if you entered the temple particularly, the first thing you had to do was to wash in a basin. They would say a sea. You had to wash and become clean. And thus the sea of glass represents that barrier. That barrier between things that are holy and things that are not. It's the point in which you dare not cross without approval. In the temple, as you came in, like we said, there is the sea of glass. There is the sea, and you had to wash. And then on the other side of it, as you walk towards the Holy of Holy Places, on the walls were these images of these vicious creatures. They're played out in here in chapter 4, verse 6 and 8. It says, in the living center around the throne were 4 living creatures. They were covered with eyes in front and in back. The first living creature was like a lion. The second was like an ox. The third had a face like a man. The fourth was like a flying eagle. Each of the 4 living creatures had 6 wings and was covered with eyes all around, even under his wings. Day and night they never stopped saying, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty, who was and is to come. These creatures are the cherubim. That's what was on the wall of the temple as you walked to the holy. Vicious creatures. God's war wagon, one writer said. God's war wagon against anything that is unholy and evil. It doesn't make it into the presence of God. They will destroy anything that is unholy and evil. That's God's war wagon. And it was a stark reminder, I'm sure, if you were a priest and making your way through there, You're going to ask yourself, am I holy? Have I been washed? Have I been cleansed? Because if not, that's their job. They defend God's holiness. Holy, 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 they chant. And when they chant it, what happens with the 24 elders? They worship too. So now let me ask you, in view of this description, who is on the throne? That's God. This is God's throne. And the elders are His people. And to get into His presence, you have to walk in front of the cherubim. You have to be holy. Now, we could have, if we were writing it the way we would, we could have just said, who's on the throne? God is. Or he could have just wrote, Revelation chapter 4, God is on the throne. He could have just wrote it that. He could have just written it that way. But it wouldn't have had the same punch. It wouldn't have had the same dramatic effect. Apocalyptic literature, remember, is partly about making you feel it. And so if you can imagine being in this situation, if it sounds a little foreboding, a little uncomfortable, yeah, there's a reason why. It's because it's a powerful scene.